Welcome to this edition of the Committee on the Present Danger China's webinar series, a weekly service we are providing to illuminate the threat that the United States faces from the Chinese Communist Party, specifically by focusing in on the myriad ways in which it is waging war against us, unrestricted war, as they call it, meaning the use of every conceivable vehicle for undermining our country, for helping to diminish its power, its influence, its alliance relationships, and not least to endanger both the American people and a government of, by, and for them. Today, we're going to focus on a topic that has been very much in the news of late. It's obvious that it has enormous importance to President Trump personally and to the administration he leads, namely the war in Ukraine and the apparent urgent desire of the president to stop the bloodletting that has been taking place there on a scale that we really haven't seen, arguably, since World War II. Well, what does that have to do with China, one might ask, or unrestricted warfare on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, aimed at undermining us and taking us down if they can? Well, the thesis of this particular program is it has everything to do with the Chinese Communist Party under the leadership of its, well, emperor, at least to date, Xi Jinping. We're going to lay this out for you in some detail with three of our best experts on this and related subjects. Before I summon the first of them, let me just give you a little bit of context of my own. I believe that the Chinese Communist Party has, under Xi Jinping, sought, as I've mentioned, to do us incalculable harm, but is appreciated, as have its predecessors in power in China, that one has to do it carefully, because the United States has considerable military power, and were it to be wielded effectively, decisively against the Chinese Communist Party, not just the military power, but the political warfare capabilities, the economic and financial capabilities, the diplomatic capabilities perhaps as well, we could well undo the Chinese Communist Party and quite possibly do it before they have a chance to take us apart, as they seek to do. So the Chinese have worked assiduously, again, particularly under Xi Jinping, to see what they can do to accelerate our demise by, if you will, a death of 1,000 cuts. The unrestricted warfare that we've documented in, I think now, well over 210 different programs in this series has been greatly exacerbated by the, what I call, strategic arson of Xi Jinping. His use of stratagems of creating conflicts in various places around the world, or setting the stage for them in some cases, all for the purposes of weakening us and creating new opportunities for him to pursue both our demise and our replacement by China as the preeminent power in the world. Which brings us to Ukraine. we're going to discuss the fact that Xi Jinping hosted Vladimir Putin in Beijing for the occasion of the opening ceremonies of the 2022 Olympics in February of that year. About 2 weeks after the games ended, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Our thesis at the Committee on the Present Danger of China is that that is, as the communists are fond of saying, no accident, comrade. That in fact, Xi Jinping personally greenlighted the invasion of Ukraine, maybe even conjured it up. Not that it wouldn't have occurred to Putin, he's invaded the place a couple of times already, but that it would be good to do it now, I think was an idea that was very much inspired by Xi Jinping. And what we have seen in the aftermath of that invasion is that the Chinese communists have not only assiduously supported Putin, but have arguably been the greatest beneficiary from this war by far. Beneficiary in the sense that they have been able to extract vast amounts of Russian energy at cut-rate prices. Beneficiary in the sense that they have sold sizable quantities of arms, and most especially, and really this is central to our discussion today, they have succeeded with the war in Ukraine in conjuring up chaos that has served their purposes. Chaos in Europe, chaos in the relationship between the United States and its European allies, chaos in the sense that the West in general, but specifically the United States, has been compelled, or at least has felt compelled, to focus intensively on Ukraine, to dedicate immense resources to the war there, and not least, arguably, perhaps most importantly, to deplete its arsenal that might otherwise be needed and useful in resisting Chinese aggression. I would argue that the same has been done in the Middle East as well, and the seeds have been set for other places for conflict, notably with Nicolas Maduro coming back from Beijing also, as did the Iranians and the Palestinians, with invasion on his mind, as I think it was on theirs. His case, Guyana, not yet actualized, but perhaps the positioning of an American amphibious battle group off the coast of Venezuela at the moment is meant to not only interdict drugs, but also to signal that that must not happen. Korea, maybe another place where a clash is in the offing. Again, more distractions, more chaos, more inability to focus on what our friend and colleague Captain James Fennell calls the main thing, namely the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party. To give us a little bit of background, context, if you will, for how all of this has played out in the period since February of 2022, I'm delighted to welcome back one of our most important contributors to these programs and to the Committee on the Present Danger of China, of which he is a member, and to so much that is done that is helpful in our country in educating the American people about the threats we face. Yes, both from enemies without, but also enemies within. And that would be Trevor Loudon. Trevor is the author of a number of books, including The Enemy Within. The Enemy Within the Church is a movie that he's made, as is The Enemies Within. Multi-volume sets, including The Security Risk Senators and House Un-Americans, that cover, respectively, the two chambers of Congress and how the enemies of within are burrowed inside them. He has been a podcaster as well as a filmmaker. He is an essayist par excellence. and a great colleague and resource. And I couldn't be more pleased to have him with us to talk a bit about the war in Ukraine, both what is obviously going on there and what are its implications, and whether the prospects for peace are at hand in the absence of attention being paid to and corrective action taken concerning the Chinese Communist Party's influence and role there. Trevor, well, welcome back once again. It's so great to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Frank. I think the main point to realize here is that the Russians and the Chinese have been in a strategic partnership for many, many years. Stanislav Lunev, for instance, one of the key defectors from Russian military intelligence, I think he defected from New York about 2010, well after the so-called collapse of communism, pointed out, as have many other defectors, that there's a division of labor between Russia and China. Russia has the nuclear weapons. China has the manpower. China has the soldiers, the boots on the ground. And when the final attack against America comes, the Russians will use the nukes, but the Chinese will use up their surplus young men. And they have about 30 million surplus young men because of the one-child policy and aborting many, many baby girls for a very long time. So when we see Putin going to China to celebrate the Olympics, and then we see a subsequent invasion of Ukraine, we shouldn't be surprised. There are those who theorize and say that actually one of the reasons Ukraine managed to survive the initial assault is because Putin delayed his attack in the spring thaw till after Xi had had his moment of glory at the Olympics, meaning that had he attacked earlier when the ground was still frozen, he could have deployed his tanks across open fields. But because he waited till after the Olympics, when the ground had started to thaw, the tanks would have got bogged. So they went in columns down highways, which made them very easy for the Ukrainians to surround and pick off. Ukraine might not have survived that initial assault had Putin been more militarily wise and less appeasing to President Xi, giving Xi his moment of glory. The Russians and the Chinese have been in an intelligence sharing partnership, I believe, since 1997, meaning anything the Chinese gather, go to the Russians, anything the Russians gather, go to the Chinese. They are as close as Mussolini and Hitler. They are integrally working together. They hold regular Zapad military exercises. The last one outside St. Petersburg, the largest military exercise, I believe, in world history, was predicated on playing out a nuclear attack on the United States. There's a new one coming up in September in Belarus, which many believe may be a lead up to an attack on Lithuania, Poland, the Saviki Gap, the piece of land that joins Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave, and separates Poland from Lithuania, etc. And to cut that off would strangle the Baltic states. The Baltics being all NATO members, Poland being a NATO member, that would set up a major international crisis, which could happen just a few weeks away. So it is known that when Russia invaded Ukraine, there were major troop deployments on the southeastern coast of China. Many thought they were getting ready to launch an attack, possibly on Taiwan, possibly the Philippines, maybe even further afield, who knows. But those troops were stood down when it became clear that the Russians weren't going to storm through Ukraine in 3 days or a week. When they got into a long, protracted stalemate, giving a bit of land, taking a bit of land, etc., the Chinese backed down. So what does that tell us? It tells us that, well, in my opinion, it tells us that the attack on Ukraine was the first kinetic stage of World War III, that the Chinese were going to attack into the Pacific. You would have more than likely seen Iran attack into the Middle East, and maybe Rocket Boy in North Korea attack into South Korea or Japan or whatever. Then we would have had probably internal struggles within our own country. We know that lots of Hamas, probably Russian Spetsnaz, Chinese special forces have been infiltrating our country for a very long time. And so we could have been fighting a 4 or 5 front war very, very quickly. And I think it's very clear that it's been the steadfastness and the courage of the Ukrainians in the face of this attack that has basically kept the peace, that has stopped China attacking into the Pacific. The Taiwanese government is very clear. They want the West to support Ukraine because they know while Russia is tied up in Ukraine, that China is not going to attack them or is going to be more hesitant about it. So it's very clear the Taiwanese government has absolutely no qualms about saying this. They say we have to defend Ukraine because that stops China in the Pacific. Now, there are many who argue that by confronting, by supporting Ukraine, by confronting Russia, that risks a World War III. I think it's very clear that not defending Ukraine guarantees World War III because it will embolden the Chinese, it will embolden the Iranians, it will embolden the North Koreans, all of whom are increasingly belligerent, even though, obviously Iran has suffered a major defeat in recent times, but they're down, but they're not out. So this I think the point we need to understand. China has said specifically, straight out, that the war, Russia cannot lose the war in Ukraine. They're giving arms. They've been threatened with sanctions if they're giving arms. They don't care about that anymore. We all know they're supplying the Russians with arms. We believe there are Chinese troops currently in Belarus. There are certainly North Korean troops there, and North Korea doesn't do much that China doesn't tell them to do. And so I think this is what we have to understand. This is not a territorial struggle. This is not just Vladimir Putin wanting to take a few Russian-speaking provinces in eastern Ukraine. Why would he risk, when he's got more than enough land already, why does he risk international contempt, trade sanctions to grab a few provinces? There was a recent conference in Moscow. It was overseen by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian minister of Foreign Affairs, and it had various communists and radicals from all over the world there. It was a major conference, and we translated the major document that came out of that conference. It was Russia 2050. That was what it was called. And the conference document quite clearly stated the goal of the Ukraine war is to reestablish the Russian-Soviet Empire, which will include all of Central and Eastern Europe, all of it, plus large chunks of the Middle East, plus the Asian republics, the former Kazakhstan, all of that, plus sections of Latin America and Africa. This is what the Russians are planning for. The Chinese, on the other hand, taking the rest. Stanislav Lunev said that the Chinese plan is to take the United States of America, and the Russians will use their nukes in that exercise and would probably invade Alaska and Western Canada, but the Chinese would complete the invasion by coming across the Pacific in huge numbers, knowing they would lose millions in the process. But as I said before, they've got 30 million surplus young men, which is a huge social problem Any government will tell you, you don't want 30 million single men running around your country. You want to use them productively, and taking the United States of America or other territory would be a very good use of them. So the point I'm getting at is that the Ukrainian fight is not a regional struggle. It's part of a geopolitical struggle orchestrated between the Russians and the Chinese to tie America up in the West, and Europe up in the West, and create a lot of strains and pressures on NATO, create a lot of internal pressure in the United States, because we know we have Putin Republicans out there. We know we have a very strong left in America. We know we have a lot of division over this particular issue. All of this is a big distraction. In the meantime, that gives the Chinese a free hand in the East, or a much freer hand in the East. It depletes our resources, and it also encourages, North Koreans and Iran as well. And I think this is a lesson, I think, for all of us, and for President Trump. You don't do deals with ideologues. Too many people are stuck in the idea this is just a regional power struggle, just grabbing land. But if you've got Putin, who is steeped in Marxism-Leninism, whose country is guided by the Eurasianist philosophy of Alexander Dugin, coupled with the Marxism-Leninism and Han supremacy of the Chinese, plus the Juche ideology of North Korea, plus the 12 ideology of Iran, which believes they can bring back the famous 12th Imam and bring in the day of judgment by creating chaos in the world. When you're dealing with an alliance of those major powers, all motivated by ideology, you don't do deals with people like that. They don't care about economic development. They don't care about hotels in their capital. They want to dominate their spheres of influence. They want to dominate the world, take down the United States, Europe, Israel, and anyone else who stands in their way. So only a united front against that, coupled with massive sanctions on both Russia and China, allowing Israel to finish the job and destroy the Iranian military, these are the kind of approaches that are going to finish Reagan's vision of ending the evil empire once and for all. He made a good start with Russia, but unfortunately that is coming back. They're even flying red flags on their tanks in Ukraine. They're putting up statues to Lenin and Stalin all over the place. The only way to stop this evil empire going forward is to sanction the heck out of Russia, sanction the heck out of China, rebuild the Western alliance, stand very, very strong, and with skill and enough courage, I think that the Vladimir Putin regime can be brought to its knees. He will be deposed. The mullahs will end their reign in Iran. The people of Iran will become our allies, and the CCP will be cast upon the dustbin of history. I think this is the time to stand very strong, very resolute for the West and against the reborn evil empire, and bring it to its knees. This restrainer, this appeasement movement is just beyond crazy. So I'll call it quits there, Frank, and maybe we'll take some questions later.
Yeah, we will indeed. Fantastic overview, Trevor. Thank you so much. We're going to turn next to another of our very important contributors to the webinar series, which this one is a part, as well as more broadly, the work of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, and in his own right, in innumerable other ways, to the education of the American people about the threats that we're facing from the CCP. That would be Gordon G. Chang. Gordon is a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, a columnist for Newsweek magazine, a man whose essays appear in all number of other places, as does he, and Maria Bartiromo's wonderful programs at Fox Business and Fox News, as well as myriad other places, the John Batchelor Show, notably each week, and of course, I'm proud to say on my program, Securing America. In fact, we are going to excerpt from a program that we taped with him yesterday, a section that was directly relevant to today's topic, and with his permission, we'll be running it as a real contribution to this conversation as well. Great Gordon Chang. Let's go to his video now.
Russia would not be fighting in Ukraine today were it not for the all-in Chinese support. If we go back to the very beginning, February of 2022, you're right, China green-lighted this invasion. You had February 4th, which was the joint statement between Russia and China. That's when they declared their no-limits partnership. What was interesting was that was the opening ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Now, Vladimir Putin postponed his invasion until 4 days after those Olympics ended, which was, I think, a real sign of partnership. The Chinese didn't want an invasion of Ukraine to mar their big ceremony and their big event. But what we saw after that was China supplying military intelligence to Russia. So, for instance, drone location information. The Ukrainians were using Chinese-made drones. The Chinese provided that location data to Russia so that Russia could take out the Ukrainian drone operators. But then it went all in. So, for instance, we had elevated commodity purchases, which effectively financed the war. We had diplomatic and propaganda support. China opened up its financial system to sanctioned Russian institutions. And recently, we have seen Chinese soldiers at the front. First of all, there are about a couple hundred mercenaries. Now, people have said, well, you know, this isn't Beijing's fault. But by the way, those mercenaries could not have gotten exit visas from China. They couldn't travel to Russia without the knowledge and the support and approval of the Communist Party. But it gets worse than that, Frank, because we know that there are People's Liberation Army officers at the front in Ukraine as well. So that's formal Chinese military. On your larger point about China prolonging this war, two things. First of all, we know that as India has reduced its purchases of Russian crude oil, the Chinese have increased their purchases of that commodity. So that helps Russia. But also we know that China wants this war to continue indefinitely. And this was made painfully clear when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on July 2nd had his conversation with Kaja Kallas, who is the EU's foreign policy chief. And as we know from the South China Morning Post and the Financial Times, Wang Yi said that China did not want Russia to lose because if Russia lost, then the United States would be able to focus on China in East Asia. Well, if you extrapolate that a little bit, it means that China also doesn't want the war to end, because if the war ends, even with the Russian victory, it means the U.S. can focus on China in East Asia. So this is China prolonging this war for its own purposes. I think that Xi Jinping has taken 2 pages from his hero, Mao Zedong's peasant movement playbook. First one is to encircle the cities from the countryside. That's the way Mao beat Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. Ukraine, Middle East, elsewhere, that's countryside, and we are the city. But to specifically address chaos, which is the second part of that playbook, in 1966, Mao wrote to his wife, John Qing, that great chaos, quote, great chaos under heaven achieves great order under heaven. Now, great order under heaven was Mao's code phrase for worldwide Chinese rule. So we see Xi Jinping's sowing chaos, disruption. And it's not just Eastern Europe with the war in Ukraine. It's also North Africa with insurgencies that look like wars. It's with China's support for Iran and its terrorist proxies, Hamas, Houthi militia, and Hezbollah, as well as Pakistan with India. This is really, I think, serious, because you see Xi Jinping setting the world on fire.
Absolutely. What an apt metaphor is setting the world on fire. As I mentioned earlier, I think of Xi as a strategic arsonist, and the conflagrations that he has been deliberately setting are purposeful, and its intent, unless stopped, will be to continue. I'm quite concerned, for reasons we'll talk about further, in our conversations to come here at home as well as elsewhere in the Pacific Theater particularly. We're going to hear from one more presenter, again, an invaluable leader on the whole agenda of the Chinese Communist Party, what it is up to, what it seeks to accomplish, and how. He is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, I'm very proud to say, and a frequent contributor to these programs as well. Indeed, one of our most faithful contributors. His name is Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps retired. He has the distinction of having also served as a Foreign Service officer. He's an attorney by training, but an entrepreneur with considerable success in East Asia for many years. He is an author as well of numerous essays, including several of direct relevance to today's topic, but also a book that is very much germane to the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party and the need to understand it better. It's entitled When China Attacks, A Warning to America. Gordon Chang's book, Plan Red, which I neglected to mention a moment ago, China's project to destroy America, and Colonel Newsom's book, When China Attacks, are really bookends on this subject, and we're delighted to be able to feature both of them. We have, by virtue of, again, an interview that Colonel Newsham gave me earlier today for Securing America, the ability to present to you some of his relevant thoughts to this issue of the Ukraine war and China's role in continuing it. Let's go to the video with Colonel Newsham now.
The Chinese have been supporting the Russians from day one. There was flights from China with on transport aircraft with the transponders turned off, secret flights into Russia from almost the very beginning, with obviously sensitive technology involved, and the support for Russia from China has continued. For a couple of years, the Biden administration pretended it didn't exist, even though everybody knew it did. And then finally, the Chinese have said, well, we don't really care. Of course, we're going to give you this help. And what are you going to do about it? The Chinese, if you remember, before the war started, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin met, and they described it as a no-limits partnership. And the idea was that, well, China's going to give the go-ahead, and Ukraine's going to be gone, and Putin's going to get what he wants. And the Chinese were saying at the time, well, when the time comes for us to settle Taiwan once and for all, we expect the the Russians to return the favor. And that was very much Chinese thinking on this. And it's simply continued. And the Chinese are glad to have this war going on. They've adjusted, of course, to the situation, and they, of course, are always seeing what the West's reaction is, what the U.S. reaction is, what's the potential downside for China, and they appear to see almost nothing. In fact, I think they see nothing that they don't really like, because this is a huge distraction for the Americans, for the West. Even the Japanese have to pay some attention to it. It's not just a question of taking up political bandwidth. It seems that despite America being the greatest country on earth, it seems like there's only like one or two things an administration can ever focus on with any seriousness, which is hard to imagine, but that seems to be the case. So all the focus is on Europe, not on China, not on Taiwan, not on Asia. And the Chinese are glad to have it, as is well known. Wang Yi, the top diplomat from China, said the other day, or recently, what I just said, that we're glad the war's going on and we'd like it to continue because it does cause a distraction. Also on the U.S. side, there's still people who think, well, we need China's help with fill in the blank, North Korea, transnational crime, fentanyl of all things. Therefore, we're not going to really call them out on what they're doing to support Russia. And that support includes buying Iranian oil, 90% of it, which is then used to produce, and the Iranians use the money to build drones, which they give to the Russians to keep the war going. The Chinese are, of course, providing drones directly, the full models, not just components. And that's just, it's ongoing, and unless you apply pressure on China, your chances of getting a negotiated peace or an end to the war in Ukraine are much, much reduced. They probably don't even exist. And what has been done to pressure China for what they have done to support Russia? Nothing. And that's a bipartisan achievement. There are people, of course, on both sides who understand that something needs done, but nothing's been done. The Chinese look at it and must pinch themselves laughing that, well, we've supported the Russians who are keeping the Americans engaged. They're depleting their arsenals, and these are very seriously depleted. And they don't have the stuff to fight a war in the Pacific, and it's also become a domestic issue in the United States, where we have the, once again, we're turning on ourselves to decide what to do about Ukraine, about Russia. And when you're doing that, you're not thinking about the real threat, the ones who can kill us. Now, some people will say, well, look, the Russians and the Chinese, it's not really a relationship. They don't like each other. They're suspicious of each other. Nothing to worry about. Well, their strategic interests align. And that interest is to beat back and ideally destroy or defeat the United States. They may see it a little differently, but the end result is the same. They are both aligned against a common enemy, which is us, which is the West, the free nations, and they're cooperating freely. And they will do that, and they will continue to do that as long as it seems to be beneficial. And once again, if you're the Chinese and there's no downside risk, nobody's done anything to you, and you're killing 70,000 Americans or some tens of thousands every year from fentanyl, and they're still not doing anything to you, well, you're going to keep doing it. And that is what has given Russia the wherewithal to continue to prosecute this war the way they have. And I haven't mentioned North Korea. They've obviously provided troops, they've provided artillery shells, other ammunition, small arms, the things that keep the Russian war machine going. And that is done with China's approval. They wouldn't be doing it if Beijing didn't allow it. And once again, what has been done to the Chinese for doing this? Nothing. I've heard it said that when the North Koreans supply all this stuff to the Russians, well, the Chinese probably are backfilling it into North Korean arsenals. And it's plausible to me, but China is the core to all of this. And unless you address that, it's not going to happen. And you also notice that in our behavior here, we have no political warfare effort against the Chinese, even against the Russians, really. They've been doing all of this, and there's really been no effort to address the issue, as I say, from a non-kinetic standpoint, the political standpoint. Has anyone ever, for example, pointed out that Putin, not exactly following in the tradition of Ivan Grozny, or Ivan the Great, who took on the Mongols, or Peter the Great even, and he's the one who's turned Russia into a Chinese vassal state. Now, this is something you should be hearing nonstop, and you don't hear it at all. Do you hear anything about, from the U.S. side, successive administrations, about what China has been doing, as I say, to support Russia, but also their ulterior motives here? And China fully intends to get back the Russian Far East territories that they think the Russians took from them unfairly in the 18th century and a little later, some of them. They're going to get it back. And Putin must wake up every morning wondering if there's 5 Shenzhens on his side of the border, these huge, shiny cities. And the Chinese far outnumber the Russian population in that area. They are across the border. The local Russians hate it. Is anybody capitalizing on this to appeal to the Russian people? Not at all. And so the Chinese are getting away with literally with murder, supporting people who are committing it, and yet we're letting 600,000 Chinese students come in as a sign of good faith. We're begging them to talk to us about fentanyl, which they could turn off in an afternoon. What have we done? Well, nothing at all. It's embarrassing, and the list goes on. TikTok, well, we've been talking for years about ending this. The Indians did it in about 72 hours. Us, we can't get around to it, and the White House now has a TikTok account. The Chinese must be, I suspect they're in some pain from having pinched themselves so hard at laughing. at what we're doing. But when it comes to Ukraine and that situation and trying to end it, the road goes through Beijing, and they have no reason to stop what they're doing. We need to give them one.
Amen. Colonel Grant Newsom, excellent send-off for our conversation, further conversation with our single live guest at the moment, and that would be Trevor Loudon, of course. Trevor, you've heard from our colleagues about the involvement of China, the deliberate nature of its activities, and its ambitions that seem unmistakably clear, if you're willing to look at them, that this is just the appetizer course, that war in Ukraine, the subsequent war in the Middle East, as you've talked about as well, and the possibility of it further sparking off or flaming on, I might say, at Xi's behest in other parts of the world, all speaks to a single question, it seems to me, and I'd be very interested in how you feel about this. Are we at a point where the idea of, addressing this problem with China is simply not a matter of bringing them into the negotiations, for example? I've had people respond to my criticism that Xi is the missing man in what's happened to date. But rather, the only solution to this problem, in the final analysis, is the end of the Chinese Communist Party, and that our every effort ought to be vectored to trying to accomplish that. What say you, sir?
Well, 100%. Reagan saw this. He saw that we could continue to deal with the Soviet Union and continue to have arms treaties, which they always broke. You could continue to subsidize the Soviet Union with trade and then spend billions defending yourself from the Soviet Union, or you could take down the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Which was the better option? Well, the only way to have peace in the world right now is to take down the CCP. Now, we got to understand the CCP almost fell a couple of years ago during the white paper protests, when people were upset about the COVID restrictions and had major demonstrations in key Chinese cities and caused huge instability. A word of President Trump being the president at the time instead of Biden, and offered a word of encouragement to the white paper protesters, the CCP might already be gone. But we make billions of dollars trading with the CCP, and then spend about 10 times that amount defending ourselves from what we have created. The only reason this crazy situation endures, the toleration of the fentanyl murders, the COVID-19 debacle, the corruption that the Chinese business spreads to our communities, etc. The only reason this is tolerated is because the Chinese have captured many of our elites. So the real way to end the Ukraine war is to clean out the Chinese captured elites in our country, because they are enabling China and China is enabling Russia, which is a huge distraction. But there are certain people in our country who think it is far better to make common cause with the Chinese, make money with the Chinese, do the Chinese bidding, than stand up for America. We had these kind of people in World War II as well. They were funding the Nazi war machine right up to the very last days. Well, we look with contempt upon those people. Well, we should look with contempt upon those people now who are enabling the CCP to keep doing what it's doing to us and enabling them to do what they're doing to Ukraine. 40 million Ukrainians who just want freedom, who want to be part of the West, are now enduring immeasurable punishment because we are soft on the CCP. That's the reason. It comes back to us. We will not stand and do what needs to be done. And it doesn't have to cost us money. It doesn't have to cost us lives. It just means to cut the CCP money pipeline to our elites. Wouldn't that be a good thing to do for our grandchildren?
I couldn't agree more with you, Trevor. In fact, as you know, we've written a book, Didi Logason, our absent colleague, and I, entitled The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. And its essence, as you said, Trevor, is to hold accountable. At a minimum, the prosecution should be in the court of public opinion, preferably in, Third Amendment or Third Section, Title 3, whatever it is, Title 3 of the Constitution, Article 3, that's the word I'm looking for. Courts as well. But the point is, Trevor, as you're saying, that we have to hold those elites accountable in some form or fashion. We have to cut off what they're doing to support and enable our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. And it starts with us. It starts with us. And I think, as we've talked about on many of these programs, it starts with ensuring that Wall Street stops putting our money in the service of the Chinese Communist Party and its companies, including those supporting its military, which is, among other things, building weapons with which to kill us. So if you have money in the stock markets, whether it's in your pension funds or mutual funds or exchange-traded funds or index funds or, college savings accounts or whatever, I entreat you to do something you uniquely can do, which is to tell those who manage your money, presumably on Wall Street, you do not want any of it being used in China to support, to enable, to embolden, as well as empower the people who are determined to destroy this country, namely the Chinese Communist Party. Trevor, I wanted to ask you about something I always invite you to discuss, because beyond that simple action by people who have money in the capital markets of the United States that maybe unwittingly having it lent out or invested in China, you have a different approach that you have developed based on some very salutary, actual practice with respect to other criminal actors. I think properly understood, the Chinese Communist Party is a transnational criminal organization at the end of the day. Talk a bit about what your recommendation is to roll them up, those enemies within working for China. And by the way, the Sharia supremacists who are their allies as well.
Well, Diana West wrote a great book, The Red Thread, which was all about, two books, American Betrayal and Red Thread, which pointed out that the reason the Islamists and other enemies have done so well against us is we have far too many collaborators within our system who are helping them do so. So we got to treat the Chinese regime, I think the Iranian regime and the Russian regime all as criminal enterprises. So how do you take down organized crime? Well, any cop will tell you this is policing 101. You've got to, first of all, identify that these people are criminals. They are intent on destroying us. So you've got to go where they're weakest. You identify their networks, and then you start arresting low-level members of their networks. You have to set up a new part of the FBI, which is all about ending foreign infiltration and influence operations in America. Dedicated 100% to that. Then this new institution has to go out and start rolling up academics, Chinese students, businessmen who are doing shady deals with the Chinese, Wall Street guys. You start rolling them up and prosecuting them for offences under the FARA Act or whatever. But the real target is not these guys. What you're going to do is ask these people, you're going to give them a choice. We're going to give you 5 years for violating the FARA Act in your deals facilitating deals between Iran and people in the DOD or whatever it is. We're going to give you 5 years for that. Or you can tell us everything you know about the networks who supported you, who recruited, etc. And you will get freedom and immunity from prosecution, and you can live your life freely. You'll never hold public office again or anything like that, but you won't go to jail if you tell us what you know. And the president would say, okay, every foreign actor, every traitor, everybody who's working for the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, the cartel, whatever, you've got 3 months to come forward and register your name. Register your name with the FBI and then tell us everything you know. And if you're honest, you will get immunity from prosecution. You may be required to testify, but you'll get immunity. You would start to destroy the networks in this country, because the Iranian businessman paying off the senator wouldn't know if the senator had taken the deal and was wearing a wire, and the senator wouldn't know if the Iranian businessman had taken a deal and was wearing a wire. And just by the way, this 3-month amnesty is, if you're foreign, you've got 3 months to leave the country and never return. If you're domestic, you've got 3 months to come in and register your name. This would cause a complete meltdown of every foreign intelligence network in America. Their trust would be completely blown. This is how you take down mafia gangs. This is how the British took down the Thuggy gangs in India in the 19th century. This is how Thomas Dewey took down Murder, Inc. You find the low-level guys, you give them a deal. And you keep going up and up and up the chain. Now, at the end of it, you'd have several thousand informants. You'd have as not much evidence you want as you needed, and the few recalcitrants who wouldn't come forward and confess, you'd have enough evidence to put them in Leavenworth for the rest of their natural life. You might only have to jail a couple of hundred people, but you'd clean out all the Chinese, the Russian, Iranian, North Korean and Cuban networks in the country, and this would be a very different place quickly. So it's just using organized crime techniques against our foreign enemies who have co-opted so many of our congressmen and senators and big tech people and academics and Hollywood personalities and Wall Street actors. So it's not hard to do. Very few people would have to go to jail, but the American public would finally understand how deep the treason is and would support the security measures going forward to ensure that this doesn't happen again. It's what Giuliani did to hurt the mafia in New York. It's the same tactic. Just use it against the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians and the Venezuelans, and we would have a different country very soon and a much, much more educated public.
I find this to be one of the most creative and, needless to say, necessary approaches to addressing this problem. And Trevor, I always appreciate you working through it with our audience, and we'll probably continue to urge you to do so, because I think it deserves not just discussion, but action, as our friend Steve Bannon likes to say. You mentioned the problem of Chinese students. I invite you to talk a little bit further about how you see that in the category of enemies within, Trevor, because the President of the United States, to my great distress, announced yesterday that he thought we needed 600,000 of them, considerably up from the 270,000, which seemed to me to be wildly more than is justifiable, but that are here at the present time. What are your thoughts, sir?
I think this is beyond insane. I cannot see. Look, there are people around President Trump, the restrainers, the Curtis Yarvin disciples, who seriously believe we should appease China and give them East Asia, give Russia Europe, and just America goes on its own. So these people are absolutely calling, trying to influence the government. So we go soft on China, we go soft on Russia, soft on our enemies, because this is somehow going to guarantee America's peace and prosperity. Look, we know it's documented in Canada that the Chinese are using Chinese students in Canada to influence elections. There are multiple cases of Chinese students being caught working for the espionage services, stealing our technology. There's dozens and dozens of cases. We know that at least 10% of Chinese students are working directly for the intelligence services. So that would be another 60,000 Chinese agents in America minimum, working at MIT, working in robotics laboratories. They're not going to be studying sociology at Bard College. They're not going to be, they're not going to be studying medieval history. They're going to be in the STEM fields, all the military technology application fields. This is just, for a president who campaigned against China to do this is just, it makes you, I've got no words for it. He was talking a few months ago about kicking the Chinese students out. Now he wants to double the numbers.
More than double, yeah.
More than double the numbers, yeah. So
I'm
how do we by this in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, look, I am prayerful that voices like yours, and I'm hoping those of our audience and others that I know are being raised. We've talked about it in the course of the day on taping several programs of Securing America, pre-taping them for the holiday weekend. But I think people that command real respect in this space agree with you completely, as do I, that this way lies even greater peril than what we experience at the moment. And that's even before you add in, as we've touched on a little bit here, 100,000, who knows? Maybe it's considerably more than that.
Well, you mentioned
military personnel of China that are in this country. Because you give them all student interns or helpmates or enablers or whatever you want to call them is again beyond comprehension.
Look, if Nancy Pelosi proposed this, we'd all be horrified and united in opposition against it, and we wouldn't be surprised by it.
Yeah.
But I think we're all surprised by President Trump doing this, but we should be equally united in opposition to this idea. Look, it's like the illegal immigrants. They should all go home. Well, the Chinese students should all go home. They're the sons and daughters of the Communist Party elite. They are from crime families. That's like inviting 600,000 mafia children into your country. Yeah. Why would you do that?
And Trevor, I don't think this has been mentioned, but I think it's worth taking a moment on it. Even if one said, let's, for the purpose of discussion, assert that there are some that are not Chinese Communist Party princelings or family members. They're not committed to the Chinese agenda, the Communist Party's agenda, that is, of destroying the United States. They're not, ticking time bombs, in other words. When you map those with what are known as overseas Chinese police service centers, the service they evidently produce, and I'm told there are, they closed down one of these in New York City, but that there are maybe another, half dozen or more of them around the country. And that the purpose, the service they render, is what I started to say, is they bring in a student, let's say, perhaps a dissident student, if there is such a thing. And there on a television screen is one of their loved ones, obviously in custody of the Chinese secret police or, intelligence services. And it's a pretty clear message that is imparted, whether explicitly or just inferentially, that something bad might happen to that loved one if you don't do what you're told. And not just what you're told, but what you are obliged to do under Chinese law. Right?
You're obliged to helping the Chinese military wherever you are at any time. If you are told to steal a secret, if you're told to learn a metallurgy project, a robotics, some robotics technology, that belongs to your knowledge belongs to the CCP. This is analogous to inviting 600,000 German youth to America in 1939. Do you think Hitler might have used those people during wartime?
Sure. And this is the concern, is that in the run-up to wartime, which may well be something that starts with the Philippines or starts with Taiwan, but my guess is it probably starts here first, just render us incapable of doing much about that foreign theater. How hard would that be, Trevor? You know a lot about this. If you have, let's just say for purposes of the discussion, 750,000 Chinese nationals available to try to disrupt activities in this country, like, rail service for military, convoys that are taking kit to the coast to be shipped or out of a port there to go to sea and to foreign war. What are the chances that can happen? What are the chances that the power grid is up, for example, or telecommunications or whatever? The infrastructure more generally is under siege.
You imagine if Britain had 10,000 German or 50,000 German students allowed to run around freely in Britain before World War II. Do you think Britain would have survived the war? How many FBI agents are in this country? They're going to monitor 600,000 Chinese students, are they?
Right.
They're going to be on their case all the time. When they're supposed
especially
to
when it takes multiples of them to just be monitoring any single individual.
To monitor one. So what are you going to hire 3.5 million more FBI agents? Yeah. That's going to cancel out any economic benefit we might get from. And the other thing, look, American kids struggle with tuition. Why is tuition so high? Because Chinese Communist Party parents pay big money to colleges to educate their children in America. You take that away, you would get a lot of universities lowering their tuition fees way, way down. And, some of them might close, but guess what? You could turn them into trade schools and actually train people in useful professions.
And
which might be useful.
Them to be hating America, among other things.
Not learn sociology, learn diesel technology instead, or become machinists who could actually build ships and planes during the coming war.
Yeah. Well, if we have that luxury, it's not a happy thought that we might be in another war, but if we have the chance, as we did in World War II, to ramp up a bit, maybe we can deter it. One does not need necessarily to agree with everything Laura Loomer has said or done over the years. But what she has been saying and doing of late in terms of challenging people who are serving in the Trump administration, and I'm not saying that she's got all of it right, but she is at least raising alarms about the fact that there are people in the administration. You mentioned restrainers, and I think they're actually retreatists more than restrainers. They're isolationists of the worst kind, or maybe even sort of fellow travelers with our enemies. Whether it's in the context of Ukraine or whether it's in the context of Russia or China or, for that matter, Iran, North Korea, who knows? We're seeing a president whose instincts, I personally believe, are generally pretty sound, whose policy, his stated policy, is peace through strength, whose approach to America First has not historically been of the Lindbergh brand of America First. You talked about people who were, aiding and abetting the Nazis in the run-up to World War II. but rather, putting America first by having it sensibly engage with allies that are like-minded and are willing to help support us in fighting our common battles so that we don't have to do it, if only we will render such support as they need, material or political or information, intelligence, what have you. So talk just a little bit about the thesis that Laura has propounded here of late, and that is that we need, a serious vetting operation to be conducted. She says a department of vetting, but whatever one calls it, whatever size. Yes. It need to be a kind of ideological examination. It's not enough that you attended a campaign rally or made a campaign contribution or you said nice things once upon a time to Donald Trump. You need to be aligned with what he is trying to accomplish, not undermining it, which I believe these so-called restrainers are doing left and right. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think this works in conjunction with my idea of offering an amnesty and going after the foreign agents, but there actually has to be a vetting. The FBI used to perform this. They would go in, they would grill you, they would interview your youth pastor, your high school teacher. They were very, very careful about who they allowed in. They had certain standards. If you had communists in the family, if you had been overseas to certain places, it was all red flags. The CARP, I think they called it, character, CARP. They had an acronym for it. And I just got to say, sometimes I don't agree with Laura Loomer either, but I'll tell you what, you'd find very few people with the courage that woman has.
Yes, she does.
She's done a lot of good for this country, and she understands, being Jewish, she understands the massive propaganda operation in this country now ongoing against Israel. Mm-hmm. If she understood that the same people are doing the same kind of propaganda campaign against Ukraine, I think it would help her. Mm-hmm. But I 100% agree. And just on the idea of restrainers are the people in our administration who believe we shouldn't confront Russia. We shouldn't confront Iran. We shouldn't confront China. We should just be gentle and, not go after these regimes. Well, before World War II, we had the isolationists led by Lindbergh. And they'd always say, oh, we're not pro-Hitler. No, we just want to keep America safe and minding its own business. Well, they were liars. They were pro-Hitler. Lindbergh got a medal from Hitler at a ceremony in Berlin. And here's what I'm saying. Most of the restrainers here who will tell you, we're not pro-Putin, we're not pro-Russia, we're just trying to keep America safe. They are lying to your face.
Yes.
They are lying to your face. They are very much pro-Russia. And Tucker Carlson being a prime example. Tucker, I'm rooting for Russia. Tucker Carlson is one of the key factors in this, in building pressure for this restrainer movement. And we can see how anti-Israel that guy is, and how anti-Ukraine that guy is.
Yeah.
And he
says, pro-Iran. I mean, Russia, it's scandalous in my estimation.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that these guys have got some influence on the administration, I think, is actually our biggest problem.
Well,
the fact that the pro-Russian and the pro-Chinese people both have their hooks, both have people trying to influence Trump in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And that has to be exposed.
But Trevor, it goes back to what we talked about a moment ago, which is that those pro-Russia, pro-China people are working hand in glove with pro-Iran,
yes,
pro-Hamas, pro-Qatar people. And it's that comment, and the World Economic Forum and the UN and so on in their mix as well. It's this, what I call the totalitarian trifecta, that is so ominous, because as you've done so much to document, it's not just people in foreign countries who would like to take down our government or get it out of the way so that they can realize their ambitions for a world government of their making. It's also that they've got a presence in this country, and whether it's those hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals or whether it's jihadists of anybody's guess how many that got in, particularly during the Biden years, or whether it's, the homegrown variants sponsored by the Communist Party. Nobody's done more than you to document all this. The Democratic Socialists of America that are running this Mamdani character in New York, the Muslim Brotherhood and the various other networks of jihadis that are here. I mean, this is an enemy within problem, not just, at the influencer level, but also at the grassroots level. This is an enemy without, and they are making common cause for the purposes of our destruction. And at the head of that parade, I'm afraid, is Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, look, if we'd dealt with the enemies within when we had the chance, or if we deal with them now, Russia and China will be a piece of cake. The Muslim Brotherhood will be a piece of cake. Iran will be a piece of cake. We only can't deal with our enemies because they have so many of their people in our institutions.
Their friends.
That is the number one problem.
Yeah, I agree. And this is why we value so much your participation in these programs and so much of the work that we do at the Institute for the American Future, which I believe you are a senior fellow. I'm proud of that beyond words. And I thank you, Trevor, for being with us today in person. I'm very appreciative as well to Gordon Chang and Grant Newsom for joining us even when they can't be with us in person through the miracle of videotape. I want to thank my colleagues Didier Lageson and Oleg Atbashian for their indispensable help with all of these programs, and for you, our audience, participating by being with us either as we do this live or with us in passing the videotape, which Oleg will shortly render and post at presentdangerchina.org, to your circles of influence. I'm sure they're vast, and we very much need for your help to arouse the rest of our populace to the dangers that we've been discussing today. They're not confined to Ukraine. They will not be resolved if somehow there is a deal between Russia and Ukraine. But unless there is a solution to the problem of the Chinese Communist Party and what it is doing under Xi Jinping to engage in strategic arson worldwide, we will not be safe in this country. Make no mistake about it. Thank you again for being with us. I ask God to bless you and our country, and I hope you all have very, very happy Labor Day weekends.